Anya Kalik, and as you can see here on the screen, we also got Juan in the booth with us as we start out here tonight. Obviously, there is a lot going on all around the world. We're going to be touching a whole range of topics. So we always ask at the start of the show, take a second, hit that share button so that whoever is watching you can be watching us for all of the fantastic guests and all of the great analysis, commentary, and everything else that we are going to have here tonight. Please just take a second and hit that share button wherever you happen to be watching right now. Welcome again to the Freedom Side. Like I said, I'm Eugene Puryear. I'm here with Rania Kalik as well as Juan in the booth. Rania, how are you feeling this evening?
I'm feeling good, Eugene. I did get my second dose today, so far so good. But if, for some reason I start having chills, I don't know. In the middle of I think we'll be okay, though. I think I'll be okay for the next hour.
What you're saying is basically that no one can hold you responsible for anything you say tonight.
Not today. Not today. It's out of my hands.
Did you get Moderna, Pfizer, Sputnik 5?
I got Pfizer. Pfizer. I wanted all of them, to be honest. I mean, does anyone know, if you just get all of them, are you extra vaccinated? Yeah, it must. It's like super immunity.
As a non-doctor and non-scientist, that sounds fine, right? It sounds legitimate. Yeah, well, right on. Pfizer, successful company, right? Viagra, they've got a lot of good drugs out there. Hopefully it works well for you.
It'd be great if you're listening, Pfizer, if you could make your intellectual property available so that developing countries can produce your vaccine.
That's right. A TRIPS waiver, as it's called. WTO, happening right now. Coalition of 100 countries. I can tell you're a listener to the Punch Out podcast, Rania. Juan, how are you feeling, sir?
I'm feeling good. Good. It's been a long week and a half since we've been back. Trying to get accustomed to just being back in the city after 8 days is kind of insane. Being in a country that is so completely different than the U.S. Really takes a cultural toll.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It was quite the trip we took, obviously, to Haiti, and last week we had the opportunity to talk a little bit about that, and there'll be more coming out at BT Newsroom across all of your social media platforms as we go on to the next, week or so. We have a lot from our trip. It was a long trip. But tonight, we want to turn to two of the most critical issues that are out there, certainly in the United States, but of great import. We're at day 9 of the trial of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd, and that's where we're going to start. But a little later in the show, we're also going to be turning our attention to the just terrible crisis ongoing, really, at the border, where new administration, but some things seem not to have changed. So we've got a great lineup of folks with us. We've got Phil Agnew, Sierra Taylor, Seema Hernandez. Obviously, I'm here, Eugene Puryear. Rania's here. So we've got quite the show lined up for you. And if you get a chance, please hit that share button again. But let's just get right into it here. I'm very happy to be joined by Philip Agnew, who's an organizer with Black Men Build, and also Sierra Taylor, who's a popular educator, grassroots organizer, and artist. And I'll add friend to the show. Thank you both for joining us. Okay, we're having a quick tech issue. So maybe just to lay out, Rania, some of what's going on here in day 9 that we've seen. Now, today was really sort of the medical scientific expert day of testimony. So there was a lot of testimony from a range of different individuals who have various medical competencies. Now, this was a critical day for people to understand because the defense of Derek Chauvin, I mean, there really is no defense, but the explanation that his lawyer is offering is that George Floyd was not, in fact, killed by this knee to the neck for 8 minutes, but that he died from a fentanyl overdose, and because he had these drugs in his system, he would not have died otherwise. That is the defense that Chauvin is offering for himself. So a key issue in the context of the case is whether or not this is scientifically sound and whether or not people should consider this defense. So everyone who testified today, a number of forensic experts, people with long ranges of experience. There's one individual who even explicitly waived his fee so that he could not be labeled as a hired gun. There was a bunch of things that they went through in the context of the case today, but a few of the important ones are this. One, that Despite the assertions of Derek Chauvin's defense attorney that the actions exhibited by George Floyd, where he was struggling for his life and struggling to breathe, were not consistent with a drug overdose, there was also testimony from an expert on essentially breathing issues who went through a range of, counted the breaths, had jurors also like touch their own neck to get a sense of what he was talking about with the constriction of airways, and said unequivocally that the reason that George Floyd died was that he was lacking oxygen essentially. And also there was a criticism made by this individual of the care that he was given, or lack of care, even by the EMTs when they showed up. So the through line of all the experts that testified today was that there is no doubt that the knee on the neck, and here's an interesting part, because Chauvin's attorney is also arguing, well, it wasn't on the neck, it was on the shoulder. But that was another piece of the testimony today, that it would not have mattered, because it wasn't just the issue of the airways in his neck being constricted, but the weight being put upon him also putting serious
pounds.
pressure on his lungs as well. So you're pretty ironclad testimony, but again, this is the thing that jurors will have to weigh, whether or not the second and third degree murder charges, and we can get into that as we go on, whether that burden is met. But that's a little bit of what happened here in day 9 of the Derek Chauvin trial. It was a back and forth to some degree about whether or not he was killed in the way he obviously was killed, which is by this knee to the neck, or whether or not there was some other issue as he
Did you see that to what you said real quick, did you see that the judge, in response to, I think, a complaint from Chauvin's lawyers, told the jurors they didn't have to touch their necks? Because by the doctor, the medical professional, telling them to like wear on their necks to touch, it would have given them more of an understanding of what he experienced, which was the closing out of his airway. So, their defense is really slimy, and what they're having to do, on top of the whole trying to blame it on drugs, but also saying jurors shouldn't touch their necks so they can't feel what it's like. But anyways.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, we do have our guests here now. Philip Agnew, organizer with Black Men Build. Sierra Taylor, popular educator, grassroots organizer, and artist. Thank you both for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you for having us.
The pleasure is all mine. There's obviously a million ways I could start. Sierra, I'll start with you. I know you've been watching the trial very closely. You're the one who's pushing me to pay more attention to it, so I appreciate that. Thank you. But, looking at the piece that there was today and seeing some of the things that were laid out, and on the one hand, obviously the defense case that somehow he died in some way other than what we all saw seems totally absurd. But I found myself feeling, I don't know, some type of way about it, because ultimately the way that they were sort of laying out how that it was not some drug overdose was to go into all this thing about his drug history and his high tolerance and how that could have potentially affected him. And I get it, this is what they have to do, but it just feels like such an extra dehumanizing nature for George Floyd to have to justify that somehow he did not cause his own death, Sierra.
Yeah, it's certainly been interesting to watch. I feel like definitely seeing within the defense that sort of same sort of tactic of trying to criminalize poor people, trying to discredit people who have been oppressed, the victim of, these incredible, crimes of violence against, poor and working class people. That is something that I don't see as new. What I have been surprised by with this trial, however, is the lack of coverage that it's had in the mainstream media. I don't know if it's just me. I'd be interested to hear from you all as well, but I feel like I remember, for instance, the Trayvon Martin trial. And maybe that's just because, that was, what brought, Phil and I together and many others. And, we had this invested stake in it. But I feel like every day it was just like, the trial, in the headlines, picking apart every single little thing that every, potential witness, would have. And so I guess I'm just looking at the trial, not just within the trial itself, but what are the narratives that are coming out about the trial? Who's talking about the trial? Who's not talking about the trial, and why?
Hmm.
Yeah, I think yeah, please, Ron, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, I wonder if a part of it is like, and this is just to maybe make it a little bit more political, I suppose, but there is this kind of like Trump's not in power anymore mentality among a large segment of the political and media class, and I think that that might have something to do with it. Is the president is someone they like now, and so this is no longer seen as an issue that's dividing the country because of the president. And I hate to think that that might be the case, but I think that, and I don't think that's the only reason why, but I think that's a part of it, is the sort of going back to brunch mentality. Everything's fine now. Biden's in charge. It'll be fine.
Well, what I saw is, I don't know if you were watching the sort of the segments in between the trial today, but it would go from the live coverage of the trial, and it's like, well, that was the Siobhan trial, and now China is trying to take over the world. It's just like, holy smokes. And it's like, whereas, with when Mike Brown was killed, that took over the coverage of the attacks on Palestine by Israel. But now when this trial is covered, they're not getting, distracted on what, their focus is. And I'm just thinking about in whose interest the story is being lifted up or sort of, cast aside.
That's a good point.
Yeah, that's a good point. Well, Phil, I'm curious your same thoughts about this, how the trial's playing for you.
No, I agree. It's and I agree with both takes. Really, what Rania presented is very obvious. Joe Biden does not have a vested interest in having millions of African Americans on the street if this trial doesn't go as some hope and many expect. And so I think the coverage of the trial, it's very, very obvious to me that they don't want people seeing. And I think it's multifaceted. On one hand, they don't want, the hundreds of thousands of people who were engaged after this man's murder last year to be tuned into a trial that will obviously animate them. The vaccine is around. People are outside. People are going to come out in mass to numbers we probably would, pale in comparison to last year. But also we see a police force very willing to amputate one of their own, which also will absolutely anger, I think, a lot of people who love the police, who are friends of the police, would be blown away by the level of defections from the blue wall that we're seeing. And I don't think that's all just the police being good people. I think they're trying to, as much as they're trying to prosecute and amputate one of their own, they're also trying to defend good policing. Right. The quality policing. Every expert has gone in. Even the police chief has said, this is not what we do. This is far beyond the rules and regulations and the protocols of good policing, progressive policing. And so there's a lot of things at play. And I think all interests are vested in not having as many people watch this trial. But that doesn't stop Twitter. That doesn't stop, us from getting the news where we get it. But I agree with Sierra. It's been appalling how we haven't seen that wall-to-wall CNN 12 squares and, people talking the entire day.
Yeah, it's not the OJ trial, that's for sure. I'm glad you brought up the issue of the cops testifying too, Phil. I actually had two separate conversations with both Rania and Sierra about this, about how struck I was at how hard they were going against Chauvin, which is relatively rare. And I think your analysis is correct. They're trying to separate themselves. But I also wonder your thoughts. I mean, are they shook a little bit too? I mean, did what happened in the uprising, I remember being there the day after that police department burned down in Minneapolis, and it was like all of the leaders of the city just seemed totally shocked, totally unprepared, kind of scared and unafraid of what to do. I mean, did that set a precedent of maybe we can't control these people that they're concerned about, you think?
Yeah, I think last year really blew the lid off of everybody's conceptions of what social movements could be and the power that they could yield in a very short time. Corporations, sports leagues, and and I know you all agree with me. I think all of that stuff, most of that was symbolism and some movement money laundering. But the fact of the matter is, the whole world was watching. Even during a pandemic, and they don't want that again. And so I think the willingness now, and I keep using that term, to amputate, right, to save the body, You amputate, you cut off your arm to save the body. And I don't think they would be cutting off their arm if they didn't feel that there was a very real danger that people were going to come out into the street. So I'll never be one to take away from the power of people on the street, the power of protest, and that fear that they have, that people are not only educated far more, they're all uniting under an umbrella, right, that says that the police have never had a right and have never had a monopoly, have never had a place in justice in our lives. And they're very afraid of that. And yet still, capitalism, white supremacy, the policing, they are willing to go to lengths that we've never seen before if it will save the core of what they do. And so we've seen a black president, right, to save this nation, to save the empire. And I think absolutely we may see a guilty verdict of one police officer if that means that they're going to save the empire.
You know, I'd love to add on to what you just said, because that was such a fantastic point. And to kind of like mention what Sierra brought up a little bit ago, you mentioned watching the mainstream media and seeing this kind of flip back between the Chauvin trial and then China, the threat of China. And we also shouldn't underestimate that the entire national security apparatus, particularly the Democratic controlled national security apparatus, does also have a vested interest in exactly what you were just saying, especially in this narrative propaganda war they're playing with China over human rights and, you know, we're the ideal country. And China's actually been calling America out, you know, at that diplomatic meeting in Anchorage, saying, you guys have a really bad racism problem and like your police kill black people like pretty regularly. So there's a vested interest from the national security state for a guilty verdict as well. Otherwise, like you said, the whole world is watching this. And so I think there really is like a multi-layered reason why the authorities from the local police, who've obviously, you know, been given allowance to come out and speak out against their brother in arms, right? That never happens. To like, you know, going upwards where the media is playing into it and where Democratic leadership is also playing into. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I hope he's found guilty. He should be. But absolutely, there's certainly a little game being played here and why it's coming out that unlike other trials in the past.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, it's certainly the sharpening of the critique against racism. I think it was 2 weeks ago, the WeChat, which is like the Chinese Twitter, more or less, there was like a cartoon from a famous newspaper cartoonist that went viral. It's hard to explain, but the long story short is it was all the Western media like in the middle of this cotton field where black slaves in America were picking cotton. In the middle of the field was a scarecrow that was like a Uyghur person, and it's all of the U.S. media asking them a question while all these black people behind them are picking cotton. Now, you know, some people might say that it's, you know, whatever, bad form or whatever it may be, but I think it was important to see it from their perspective, which is sort of like, okay, you're making all these criticisms of us, the world is all around us while your own house is sort of burning down around you, where you have these huge problems, all of this racism. And I think that international Achilles heel has always been a challenge for the United States. We saw it with the Cold War. And the impact that it had on our movements. You know, Sierra, we talk about this all the time. I mean, I know it's one of the things that Dr. Gerald Horne always says is that sort of lengthening the battlefield, quote unquote, as he puts it, tends to be one of the best strategies for Black America, because without that international pressure and embarrassment, oftentimes the U.S. government is able to just hide everything.
Yes, exactly. I was, you know, one of our comrades from Venezuela was actually talking about the fact that he said the first victim of U.S. imperialism is always someone who lives in the United States. And so just thinking about, you know, like what that actually means and how our struggles are interrelated. You know, the United States tries to play the world police. Trump outed the playbook of the ruling class, outed their interests and their values and what lengths they will take to get at it. He completely exposed Wall Street. He completely exposed, you know, the 1%. And so under Biden, they're trying to rein all of this back in. We're like, we're going to go back on the Human Rights Council, Paris Accord. Let's get back on that. Iran deal, maybe. Okay. Yep. Like even Yemen, you know, just like trying at any, you know, to gain, you know, back hegemony that was lost, when in fact, you know, you could join all of this if you'd like, but China has taken leadership in all of these different, spheres of international relations, not just in words, but in actual action, lifting people out of poverty, supporting, with vaccines, infrastructure, etc. And so, as the United States is declining in social power, as the United States is declining in economic power, the one thing that it's not declining in, and in fact is accelerating in, is militarism. And you see that playing out, of course, abroad, and this queuing up for power or for war against China and anyone else who would come at us, but also the way in which it's queuing up in the streets. And the fact of the matter is, whether Chauvin is declared guilty or innocent.
Say it wrong.
The chauvinist. Okay, finally.
Yeah, seriously, with a name like that, I'm
like, yo, why is no one talking about this? Like, am I tripping?
Crazy.
Like, why is no
it's
one
crazy.
talking about this? Yo, and so it's just like, whether or not he's found guilty or innocent.
It's like his name is Ray. His name might as well be Racist Man. Like, it's his name is Chauvin.
Right. I mean, I feel like in that notebook he keeps writing in, he just keeps writing his name over and over and over again. Like, I am not a chauvinist. I am not a
chauvin.
Yeah. No, I think, go ahead.
Just to wrap it up, but just to say, it's like, damn, I feel like I lost my point. But
sorry, the Chauvin name. That's
Chauvin got in your head.
The best part is that the show isn't over, so you can come back around to it. You haven't lost it yet. It's just misplaced. You just got to find it. I think it's an interesting piece to interrogate a little bit at where we are. Like, I think what we all know and what we all agree about for sure is that obviously a huge amount of the trial is sort of a show trial element, and that even if he is convicted, there, in many ways it could be a cover for the continuation of the same policies. So I'll ask you this, Phil, but I'm certainly curious everyone's thoughts about this. I mean, where does it leave us after this trial? I mean, let's say he does get convicted. How do you move things forward in a context in which there'll be so much triumphalism of like, ooh, look, the system worked?
Yeah, I mean, it always goes back to organizing. What is our ability to go back into the neighborhoods that we're already supposed to be in and let them know that this is a symbolic victory, if that, right? That as abolitionists, this is a conundrum that we find ourselves in, but that as Stokely asked, and he was quoting another philosopher, that, a man cannot convict himself, right? And so the police are not on trial. Policing is not on trial. And they've done everything that they can do to make sure that the police and policing in this country are not on trial. Derek Chauvin is on trial. Right? This person who acted way out of accord with how we usually do business is on trial. And so that's the story that we need to continue to tell people. And it's the same story that we've had to do since Biden won, right? Is let people know that, look, the bourgeois class is happy, right? The black liberals are happy. The white liberals are happy, some of them, right? But this actually is a continuation of everything. This is going back to normal. Is very, very bad for us. Right? Very, very bad for Haiti. Very, very bad for Palestine. Very, very bad for Brazil. Right? This is not going to be good for us. And so for me, it's just a continuation of telling that story because, frankly, I'm going to just be honest also, is there's not a lot of people who are talking about the trial. If you're knocking on doors and you're talking to people, they want to know about vaccines. Is there going to be another stimulus? They want to talk about some of the material things. But by and large, people see this as political theater and pretty much expect for him to be found not guilty. Right. And I do think a guilty verdict will signal to some people that we're making some progress. And it's up to us as movement people to really recalibrate that notion. Right. And also to own the fact that there wouldn't have even been this level of theater had we not pushed for it, had we not pressured it, had they not been afraid. And so what more can we get with more organizing? Right. How else can we make sure that our power is felt and that we throw our weight around? And if we can do all of that and get this show trial, think about what we can do in Biden. Think about what we can do in 2022 in Florida. Think about what we can do in 2024 around the country and keep pushing forward that narrative, in my opinion, because I haven't paid attention as much to the trial. I've read the updates and listened to Democracy Now! In the morning. They play half the trial in the morning. To be honest, I think the material needs of people, the everyday needs of people are where we should be. right? And us tying in this narrative is going to be important.
No, I think
You know,
that's
sometimes
yeah, please.
I don't think I think it's going to continue under Biden. He's beefing up funding to police, but I just, as somebody who spends the majority of the year living outside of the country, the vast majority of the year, I do have to say, in the last, I think I've lived outside of the U.S. for the past 4 or 5 years, and I've spent a lot of time reporting from some countries that are explicitly police states. And I don't think Americans realize what a police state America is until you
Hmm.
leave the country and feel the difference in the way you feel around police in other countries. There's a kind of like, even if you're not a black person in America, there's an inherent threat you feel. You feel scared, like you're doing something wrong. You see a cop, you're like, oh, am I speeding? You're like, what, am I doing anything? I don't want to get arrested. I don't want to get a ticket. That's such an American thing that when you leave the country is like this big relief off your shoulders you didn't even realize you felt. Of course, unless you're black in America, it's much different. But my point is like, I mean, it's shocking when I come back here, as I'm visiting right now, how suffocating that feeling is when you're outside of it for so long. And I mean, I've been to Syria. It's quite a police state in Syria.
Hmm.
People don't feel as threatened when they see the police in Syria as people in America feel. And people in America don't even realize it. That's the scariest part of it, is a lot of people in America don't even realize it. I don't know if that adds on to really what you're saying, but it's something I often think about when I'm coming
No,
in
I
and out of
mean,
the country.
the U.S. is the richest nation in the world, right? With the poor, with some of the poorest and some of the largest wealth disparity. The top 5 billionaire, top 10, all 8 of them or 9 of them are here. And so I think the social function of police is so much, I wouldn't say more needed, but it's absolutely needed here in the United States. And I think, once again, this is the rehab job that we're watching with this Derek Chauvin trial, because the necessity for police is only going to increase as people find out that Jeff Bezos is making $8 million an hour and has been doing that since the pandemic. As people find out Elon Musk is going to control the skies and everything under us when he's building tunnels. When people discover more and more of that, as Amazon starts to unionize, but the police are going to be more and more needed, and they perform a certain social function in the United States, between the haves and the have-nots that we you go to other countries, and I do agree. I think it's still bad in a whole lot of places, but when you live in Miami and you see the wealth and the decadence right across the water from you, you better goddamn have some police in that city.
No, I think it's. I mean, they're there for a reason, and it's very clear. I mean, Sierra, I'm curious. We've said a lot, so I almost don't want to prompt you. I mean, I'm curious your thoughts. I mean, you're
Yeah,
also
that
writing
was
in
a
a
lot.
notebook, so I just figured, you were ready to go.
No, I'm just doing what Chauvin's doing. Just all working, no play, makes nothing. Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing. Like, what are the practical steps that we can take in this moment? And I'm really happy that Phil, talked about us as being abolitionists. And the thing is that revolutionaries have to study and understand revolutionary history. And in this country, you have to understand, the development, formation of chattel slavery and the development of the United States to really understand the culture that we're up against and the state that we're up against. And I think that when we see that, when we understand who our enemy is, and how their wealth, how their values, how their interests are being protected by the state, we are able then to see, like, who are we as an oppressed class, who are the most of these, and the need for us to actually unite, which is something that I feel like over the last summer scared the shit out of the ruling class. It wasn't. Oh, someone said hi. It wasn't just like black people out in the streets. It was white people. It was, people of all genders and ages. That scared the shit out of them. And so I think that is where our power lies. We can't outmight them. We can't outfund them, but we can outsmart them. And if we're able to unite the working class people of, the different sections of society to actually organize against, like, we can actually kick their ass. The abolitionist movement proves that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think anything that is successful ever seems like it's going to be successful at the beginning. It's one of those interesting historical facts that I feel like is just glossed over. Well, this thing was great. We should celebrate this thing, but no one can ever recreate it as if it just, emerged
But
fully
it's the
from the head of
reason,
Joe
right?
like
I mean,
Minerva.
it's the reason that this trial is happening the way it's happening. Is there was protests in, I mean, I've never seen anything like that in my lifetime. There was protests in every single city across the country. And I
And the
mean,
suburbs and rural
in the
areas.
suburbs. You guys, I grew up in a place called Burke, Virginia. It is a
Oh.
suburb in Northern Virginia. I did not once in my whole life growing up see anybody protest anything there, like ever. Nothing. And there was a protest in Burke, Virginia against the police killing of George Floyd. I was like shocked when I saw the video. So
That's right.
it was, I mean, that we have to give credit to that as well. Like all the other stuff we're talking about. Yeah, but that uprising, it was the longest sustained thing I've ever seen, and it was everywhere. It was incredible.
There's a couple
Right.
things that are out here in the chat. I hate to even read this, but since this is my man, I'm gonna read this. Sean Blackman said that he loves to see
Sean
not one but
Blackman,
two
what's
great
up?
FAMUans on Breakthrough News this evening. I'm gonna give you that, Sean. I'm okay with that. Do what you got to do. I need your student body president is on here right now, so I'm gonna give you that.
As the dark shadows gather across the
All
horizon.
right.
Ooh. I mean, hey, look, if I ever, I'm not even going to get into it. Shout out to the Rattlers. I'm just going to leave it there for today. But, an interesting one from Tafari here that I think is interesting. He said, we got to stop connecting our politics and possibilities to election cycles or years. Phil, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing to add. I think the nonprofit industrial complex, the Democratic Party, have been able to contour our social movements to their whim. And their time schedules, if you're running an organization that has to get $3, they give you 1 year, 2 year, 3 year grants. And so they set the clock, they set the agenda, they set the arena. And so we've got to break out of that completely and totally. So I absolutely agree with that. We can't tie our fortunes to the political whims of, those people. I mean, right now, I'm just adding on to what he said. There's nothing more to say on that. I don't know if you're going to go into some more things from the chat, but the eyewitness testimony of people was something that was interesting to me to hear, to hear the pain in people's voices, the helplessness from paramedics, from firefighters, from just people who are standing there recording, from MMA fighters who. I mean, that brother, I stayed in my body like that. That's like my motto for the rest. Yo, it's a lifestyle. I stayed in my body. And the weaponization of the bystander, the fact that a crowd of people now, we saw it in the Zimmerman trial, how a piece of concrete was made into a player in this murder, in this thing that happened. And now this crowd is becoming, because this crowd was screaming for this man's life, then it caused the officer to no longer be focused on the man's life. And I think there's a lot that is happening in this trial that is very, very, very slick. And I think one of them is the weaponization of the bystander. And Sierra knows we always talk about this in social movements, the bystander effect, the notion that the more people that see something happen, the less likely someone is to do something about it, because they assume the next person will. They assume, another group or that bigger guy over there or that paramedic or that firefighter will happen. And I think that's another fear, not just social movements and protests after something happened, but I think, and justifiably, that police departments and elected officials are very afraid that if somebody sees this happening again, there will be intervention right there. We will not be mourning the death of somebody, that there will be multiple people who are going to put hands on somebody because they don't want to recollect that moment of somebody crying at a trial saying, I wish I had done something.
Sierra?
I was thinking about the exact same thing, and the way in which this experience has been politicizing the masses. And I feel like there was an indication of the politicization that had happened up until this point, with the very fact that people were using their camera phones to film, the very fact that they were standing on the sidewalk, distant from the police officers, the different tactics that people were trying to use. The firefighter was like, okay, well, I tried my calm voice, and then I tried cussing his ass out. And then, it's just like, I mean, and people are just like, oh, I don't even know where it came from, but I just felt like that's something that I needed to do. And so just thinking about how are people learning from this moment? And, one of the witnesses was saying that she wished she could do something, but she felt like she was up against big power. The word that she used was big power, that phrase. And I was just like, that is so telling and exposing. And yeah, the boxer was just like, I wish I hadn't not done anything. And so just thinking about the politicization of the bystander, but then again, you're also having to think about the politicization of the police force and also of the ruling class in this moment and what they're learning from this moment. And so, like you were saying, Phil, about the amputation that's happening, like I'm just thinking about like what kind of Terminator arm shit is going to be like constructed out of this amputation. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's such a good point. I mean, it just speaks to, since I shouted out Sean Blackman earlier, I mentioned when we helped co-found the Stop Police Terror Project DC, a lot of people thought we were like ridiculous for saying police terrorism rather than police brutality or police violence. But the thing that struck me about the bystander testimony is just the effect of police terrorism. Like, you are afraid to do something. I mean, and I felt definitely what the person was saying, and I wish I had done something. I once saw the police in DC sodomize a guy in public looking for drugs in front of 30 people in the middle of a street. I've never seen anyone humiliated publicly in a way like that.
Where in DC did that happen?
It happened right on the corner of Georgia Avenue and Irving Street.
And people just watched, right? Like
people were just watching. And at one point, it seemed like people might do something, but like, what are you really going to do? Like, there's 30 cops and they're going to kill you. And so you're probably going to die, or at least that's the mentality. Now, I mean, you never know how it's going to play out, but I think it just speaks so heavily to the impact of just the daily harassment, beatings, dehumanization, the killings, of course, the people who are shot who don't die, that put MMA fighters, EMTs, firefighters, concerned citizens who were just enraged, and they feel like, but what can I really do? And when they were questioning the guy on like what he said, and y'all know me, I don't like to cuss on air, but we're like, well, did you call him a punk ass bitch? And he was like, yes. And I was like, well, what are they supposed to do? Like, they're killing someone right in front of him. If he does anything else, they're probably going to kill him too. And then now you're turning his words against him. I think, as you said, Phil, the weaponization of the bystander. And it really wasn't that much else I could really say about it, other than just to say I could feel it, and it was powerful because I understand what it's like to be in that situation, and there's so many people. And I think when we talk about the role the police play and wanting people to have more power over their own public safety, those are the types of moments that we really mean, where even though technically the cops work for you, technically, as a taxpayer, but you feel you can't do anything, that shows you the reality of the system in so many ways. I don't have a question coming off of that, Rania, but just, I was thinking about
I mean, I think it's, it's true. It's scary. It's a scary situation. It speaks to the fear people have of police. If you see the police brutalizing someone, like, there's two elements of that. There's one is like, we're all raised to, you're raised in school to believe that somebody with a badge is in a position of authority. So they're already in a position of authority over you. On top of that, they're armed, and they're scary. Like, if you get in the way, they might hurt you too. So yeah, that's a tough situation. And I also think just like there's a level of intimidation that everyone feels around cops, like I was speaking to before. Like, how are you supposed to stand up to that by yourself is something I can relate to. Like, how are you supposed to stand up to that by yourself? Especially when there's more than one of them.
Well, I guess the question is, you can't be by yourself. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's an existential fear. The thing that I've thought about, because I've now thought about this more than ever, would I stand by and see it? And I'm somebody who, I bristle, I don't have any endearment towards the police at all, individual or collective. But you just think how so many stories we hear of somebody running into a fire to save someone, right? So that means that life political calculus in that moment said there's a 5% chance that I could live, but I'm going in. Somebody running into a fire, somebody jumping into a lake right, to save somebody. We hear so many stories of that, and we never hear stories about people doing that with the police. And that's the level of fear that they put in us, that they are more powerful than fire. They're more powerful than an explosion. They're more powerful than a pit bull who's attacking a neighbor. They're more powerful than you potentially drowning. These are all things that you would say, no, no, you shouldn't do. But police, that you do that calculus, and it's about a zero chance I'll survive this. So I'd rather run into a fire.
That's real. That's heavy. That's heavy. I mean, but it's the reality we're living with, and I think I don't know, Sierra, is it the benefit of the trial being on TV that maybe somehow we have talking points in a way about things that maybe we should all know for people who don't know? Is it re-traumatizing people? I mean, I know that a lot of states, this is the debate over whether or not to put trials on TV beyond the sort of broader moral debates. I don't know where I'm really going with this, but I guess I personally have been feeling I'm glad it's on TV, even though maybe there are a lot of drawbacks. I'm like, well, at least it's on TV, and I don't know, it's just one of those things. It's like, well, you don't want people to say you're crazy. And it feels like when you're saying all these things about the police and about racism, are people really going to believe it? But here it is on TV. And maybe you shouldn't even have to feel that way. But I have been feeling that way, but also wondering if the flip side is also true, that, I don't know, televising it, well, you know what I'm saying.
Yes, I mean, this has been, a question I've definitely been grappling with, even after George Floyd was killed and the uprisings were occurring. I didn't watch the footage of him being killed.
I never watched it either. I never watched it.
I haven't watched, one of those since Eric Garner was killed, and it put me in this horrible, horrible depression. And so honestly, it wasn't until watching the opening statements of the trial, the first couple of days, where I actually saw the video footage. And I don't know what the right balance is. I try to watch it when I'm with my partner and not when I'm alone. I don't watch it and have it sit there for 6 hours. I don't have it on when I'm falling asleep at night or something, trying to have that distance. But I also think that there is some education for us in there. And maybe I haven't been able to weed out necessarily all of the seams. I feel like it is useful for us to have that record. And at the same time, and, this might sound a little bit, paranoid or whatever, but I was going back, to looking at these old cases like that, Dream Defenders, or we had taken up at school around police brutality. And I go to those links and they're empty. The links are broken. And so for me, I'm thinking about how are we actually keeping record of everything that is going down? How are we keeping our record? How are we keeping our score? What is our analysis? And so I think these are the tools that we have now. Hopefully Breakthrough News, you all in the future can help us, articulate what what's going on, this disarticulation. So I guess my answer is I don't know, but there's something there.
Well, Rania, I'm curious your thoughts. I mean, and also going back to the point you made earlier about living outside of the country for most of the year and for the past few years. I mean, how does this play? What do you think the impact of that anyone who can understand English can see this trial?
What do you think the impact for someone seeing this trial from outside the country?
Yeah, well, internationally, I mean, I think sort of my first point was sort of watching the trial as an American, as a black person in America, and the sort of piece of it, but also recognizing that the eyes of the world are on the George Floyd trial. I mean, I'm curious your thoughts just about the value of it being televised.
It is valuable. There is an understanding around the world. Even in the global north, there's a very visceral understanding that America's a racist place. People see it as a racist place because there's always these uprisings against racist police killings and all kinds of racism. And people, I mean, they can't quite understand it, but they also can't quite understand a lot of things about our society. They can't understand why we have mass shootings. They can't understand, they really can't. I mean, I can't tell you that on more than one occasion, someone in Lebanon has come to me, Lebanon has had a civil war. And I've had one person say to me, we don't have those here even. Why do people do that in America? Like there's a lot about America people don't get. But they understand that Black people are oppressed. It's like the one thing, if you ask anyone around the world, they'll understand. So I think if they are even watching this trial right now, they would probably assume that he's going to get off. So I will say, like, there is, the Biden administration, if he is found guilty, which I hope he is, and I believe he will be, will gain something from that internationally, because it'll kind of put a little Band-Aid on America for a little while of like, oh, okay, well, they held a racist killer accountable. And so there is value in that. And you were talking about the Cold War earlier, and America during the Cold War did start to see racism and Jim Crow as a national security issue, because it was being used against them by the Soviets to present America as the racist society that it was. And there's something I think similar happening today, not to bring it back to China, but right in this back and forth between America and China. And America's like, well, you guys are racially profiling Uyghurs, and China's like, really? You're going to talk about racial profiling? Like, who are you again, Jake Sullivan? Like, what country do you live in?
Pot and kettle situation.
Right. Pot and kettle situation.
Yeah. So the last thing I want to do is, I'm sorry, Sierra, go ahead, please.
Just a really small anecdote, but did you see the governor in Texas who is basically calling out Joe Biden's border policy, saying that there are children being harmed in these detention facilities under Biden? And so we need to take these children out of these detention facilities and put them into another private facility. It's like,
no,
we care about the children. We care about the Uyghurs, but.
Yeah, they care until nobody's looking.
Talk about concentration camp. I mean,
Final thing I want to do here is I just want to show this and maybe get some quick reactions. Juan in the booth, who is with us and was with me in Haiti, was able to capture this piece of art that was on a wall in Port-au-Prince about the George Floyd situation. And again, that's in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. Phil, your thoughts?
Artists are the gatekeepers to truth. And I think art is an incredibly powerful tool for all of us that we need to continue to harness. That touched me. And then when you got to that last kind of vignette right there, you see Mother Haiti hemming up that officer. And I mean, there's a lot there, and you did ask for quick reactions. I think the more we, as Black Americans, understand, as we said, to lengthen the battlefield and recognize and realize and acknowledge that we come in a long tradition of people who have loosed the chains of slavery, who have beaten back the baton and the badge and the bullet, and who have won and been victorious. And people are waiting for us as we are waiting for them and need them. That thing was powerful. Jerry Graffiti, I think his name was. That was very, very powerful. And what is happening in Haiti right now, it should be of note and of importance to every Black American, and always should be, as the first Black republic. And so, yeah, I wish I could be. I've never been there, and I want to go.
Okay,
so thank you for sharing.
We're gonna work on that. We're gonna work on that. Sierra Taylor.
Well, first of all, shout out to Juan in the booth. And
yo, that's such an ill drop.
Yo, Juan in the booth. No, you really love him. Juan and Kay and Will and all the homies there. I wanted to share this poem by one of Phil's favorite poets, Martin Espada.
Come on.
That I share with Eugene earlier, because just thinking about the themes that you all were lifting up tonight, it just really spoke to it. So it's called How We Could Have Lived or Died This Way. And it starts off with an excerpt from Walt Whitman. Not songs of loyalty alone are these, but songs of insurrection also. For I am the sworn poet of every dauntless rebel the world over. Walt Whitman. I see the dark-skinned bodies falling in the street as their ancestors fell before the whip and steel, the last blood pooling, the last breath spitting. I see the immigrant street vendor flashing his wallet to the cops, shot so many times there are bullet holes in the soles of his feet. I see the deaf wood carver and his pocket knife crossing the street in front of a cop who yells, then fires. I see the drug raid, the wrong door kicked in, the minister's heart seizing up. I see the man hawking a fistful of cigarettes, the cop's chokehold that makes his wheezing lungs stop wheezing forever. I am in the crowd, at the window, kneeling beside the body left on the asphalt for hours, covered in a sheet. I see the suicides. The conga player handcuffed for drumming on the subway, hanged in his jail cell with his hands cuffed behind him. The suspect leaking blood from his chest in the back seat of a squad car. The 300-pound boy said to stampede, barehanded into the bullets drilling his forehead. I see the coroner nodding. The words he types in his reports burrowing into the skin like more bullets. I see the government investigation stacking words buzzing on the page, then suffocated as bees suffocate in a jar. I see the next black man fleeing as the fugitive slave once fled, the slave catcher shot in the back for a broken tail light. I see the cop handcuff the corpse. I see the rebels marching, hands upraised before the riot squad's faces in bandanas against tear gas, and I walk beside them unseen. I see the poets who will write the songs of insurrection generations unborn will read or hear a century from now. Words that make them wonder how we could have lived or died this way. How the descendants of slaves still fled and the descendants of slave catchers still shot them. How we awoke every morning without the blood of the dead sweating from every pore.
Thank you.
Wow.
I appreciate that. Sierra Taylor, Phil Agnew, it was an honor to have you both join us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so much.
Nice to see you, Rania, and shout out to Nicole as well.
Definitely. I like that you got the
Love
whole
y'all.
team. Appreciate y'all. We are going to, well, I don't actually want to say we're shifting gears. We're maybe just shifting areas of the battlefield, as it were, to another major issue as it concerns state violence in this country, mass incarceration.
Deeply connected.
Policing, deeply connected, and that's the crisis at the border. We are very, very honored to have with us Seema Hernandez, who's a former U.S. Senate candidate in Texas, daughter of immigrants, abolitionist, human rights advocate, and activist. Seema, thank you so much for being with us.
Hi, thank you for inviting me. Can you guys hear me okay?
You're a little low.
Yeah, a little low. Not sure why.
I don't know how to fix it.
We may be able to turn you up on our end. I mean, we can definitely hear you. I don't know.
This is what
I'm not
Juan.
getting.
This is Juan's magic. He can just turn something. Right? You just turn a knob or something. It's something I don't know. I could do it. I'd be a great tech person. I'd just be turning knobs.
No pressure.
Well, that's why we don't have you doing that.
That's why you should never have me doing it.
Seema, can I hear you? Can you say some things?
We can kind of hear you.
Yeah, it's like very muted.
Oh, okay. I don't know what to do. Maybe if I change.
It seems to be working.
that-
Whatever you're doing.
I'm
Like
putting
slightly.
up the gain.
Okay, we're
that-
putting it up a little bit. Here we
Is that
go.
better?
It is. I think it
Yes,
is.
I think so.
Yeah.
You can hear Rania?
I don't know. Talk, Seema. Let's hear. Let's
Hi.
like
how
say
are y'all?
something. Oh, I can
Okay.
hear her now. Yeah.
Yeah. There we
Chinga
go.
can work with
I mean,
Boom. This is the life of all of us here technologically trying to figure all these things out. I really, really appreciate you joining us, Seema. I mean, seeing And as you heard, we were just talking about, obviously, the Chauvin trial. I mean, I feel like we're just shifting to another area where the impact of racism, state violence, the bipartisan nature of the offenses that are being committed against so people is just so clear when we look at this crisis on the border that's happening right now. And I guess for me, and I'm curious your thoughts about this, Seema, it's almost a little... I almost feel a little dismayed that it feels like there's a lot of people who want to make it seem like, well, this isn't that bad, it's not Trump, and are trying to downplay, the serious human rights issues that are at play.
Well, I'm not sure if that was a question, but I think we all know that the immigration crisis that is happening is nothing new. We know that this is a bipartisan effort that has actually been made worse by the previous administration. And even before Trump, we had the atrocious immigration policies during Obama. And we have to talk about how this is actually interconnected with the police violence, the police terrorism that happens, because we know that a lot of what's happening at the border is caused by the empire, the US empire, the militarization in other countries that destabilizes other countries and causes people to flee here to our borders and then go through the further re-traumatization, going through these concentration camps that have only expanded under Trump. And then again, Biden is perpetuating the policies, which the president that he was, he was vice president for during Obama. It's kind of hard to go back and forth.
Yeah, they're all, because
Obama so and Biden, Obama.
Right, yeah. Nothing
like actually changes. Yeah. Yes. So we know that going back to the Obama policies isn't good enough because Obama was the deporter-in-chief. And we know that the policies that Trump perpetuated are something that Biden should not be doing in his administration.
It's also interesting when there's this like bipartisan nature. It's like a machine that exists outside of the parties. So it doesn't really matter which party takes over, because no matter who's in charge, it keeps getting bigger. The budget and the border, I think under Bill Clinton, started out at like $1.5 billion at the end of his presidency, which had ballooned to quite a big budget. And now it's around $25 billion. And that under George W. Bush, Barack Obama, Trump, Joe Biden, like the foundation was always laid there. And what strikes me as really frightening too is, of course, what's happening under Biden is absolutely horrendous. But what liberals don't seem to realize is the reason Trump could do what he did is because Bill Clinton, George W. Bush, and then Obama laid a foundation so that when he got into office, it was all there for him. There was a militarized, racist border police. There was concentration camps. It was all there for him. He had the laws on the books that he could separate families. It was all there for him. So it's so frustrating to see now so many liberals are quiet because Biden's doing it. Like, how do you react to that? How do you react to all those people who were so outraged, rightfully so, under Donald Trump because babies in cages, right? Children being separated from their parents, and now Biden's in charge. And maybe some of the most cruel of those policies, in your face cruel, may have slightly disappeared, but for the most part, all the same things are happening.
Well, we see that Title 42 is being used in a different way to reject families as a whole. And when Trump was in office, he used that specific title to reject families or to keep them in Mexico, the Remain in Mexico policy. But what the Title 42 is doing now under Biden is forcing families to separate themselves from the children so that children have a better opportunity to get asylum or be sent to family members that they have here in the United States, which is just as bad as separating families here in the United States under a Trump administration. So I do not feel like anything has actually changed. I think it's actually made worse because this will then again be used to weaponize and vilify parents for separating themselves from the children when they have no other option but to do so because the Biden administration will not accept the entire family as a whole.
I think that's crucial. I'm sorry, go ahead, Rania.
No, I was just going to say, I'm really happy you brought in the element of imperialism or empire as well, because that's another aspect of this that's completely left out, which is these destabilization campaigns in all these countries. And I think me and Eugene were talking about this earlier this week, but I mean, one thing that, if you look at the people who are coming to the border from Central America, You're talking about people coming from Honduras, from El Salvador, from Guatemala, and also people coming from Haiti. That's another one of the top groups of people trying to cross the border. And these countries all have something in common, right? They have US-backed right-wing governments. That's not a coincidence. And we never talk about that. It's completely left out of the conversation.
Well, that's something I don't think many people are comfortable talking about, especially when you're a progressive in Congress or, I don't know, someone trying to cover for this administration and what it's doing, because this administration, at least Biden and the people that he has appointed, have a history in actually meddling in other countries and backing the coups that ended up killing a lot of the indigenous leaders there, like Berta Cáceres. Like, she was killed by a U.S. military coup. And we had that destabilization still from 2011, 2013, 2014, all under the Obama administration, that perpetuated this crisis, which causes people to flee. And so this concept of, we'll just send them back home, which is something that Hillary Clinton said. We're going to send the kids back home. What home do you send them back to? What home do you send them back to when the United States backed the coup that destabilized their country and placed economic sanctions on them? We don't talk about that. And when we talk about imperialism, when we talk about these immigration policies, we also have to talk about how it came to be, how 9/11 caused the Homeland Security Act to unify these separate entities that were underneath the Department of Justice, that are now underneath the executive branch and operate at the behest of the president. And the president can do something about this through executive orders. But it is Congress that put these entities together under the executive branch, and they should be able to dismantle and abolish these agencies from being under a president and put them back under the Department of Justice.
I mean, it seems like something that should be easy to do, and the rhetoric on the campaign trail, would lead one to believe that, something is going to change here. I mean, I just wonder what you think, Seema, about how do you explain the difference between the rhetoric and the reality from so many of these people? I mean, I know you ran against Beto O'Rourke, so you know all about rhetoric over substance. And how do you get from we're going to save everybody on one day to we're going to continue the things the next?
Well, that's the thing, is that nothing is changing. And if it is changing, it's very slowly. So the way I look at this is justice is being delayed. So therefore, justice is being denied. So when you are continuing to perpetuate the policies that continuously destabilize these countries, that continuously lead people to leave their homes, to seek asylum, and then you shut down their borders under the false pretense that they can't come here because of some, arbitrary law that doesn't allow them to come here, get rid of the law. Process these families as a whole. Give them asylum in this country. Put funding towards the process to get them here instead of continuously incarcerating them under inhumane circumstances. Actually do something that is tangible instead of delaying the process to give these people asylum, which is something that they deserve after this country has destabilized their countries for decades.
To me, it seems like this is really a process of it's like you take a sledgehammer and you destroy something, and then you block off access for people to escape what you've destroyed. And then anybody who makes it through and manages to escape, you literally subject to torture. Like, the policy seems to be, and as we know, is intentional cruelty. The idea is to have a cruel border and detention system that deters people from coming to the U.S. And liberals refuse to take any responsibility for also overseeing that same process. Like, Republicans openly support it, right? They openly support a cruel immigration system that detains masses of people. And it's Democrats who, like Beto O'Rourke, who weaponize it when it's convenient and then forget about it when it's not. So, how do you reach those people? Or I guess, how do you reach their base? Why do those people not care? I can't understand I do know the answer to that, but I can't stop asking it. How can you cry about babies in cages? Rachel Maddow was on air in tears over people being separated from their parents. I don't think she cares that it's still happening. And it just shows the disgusting level of opportunism around these issues. Like, this is a game for people. It's a political game for people. And I mean, as somebody, I guess it's more a comment than a question, but as somebody who's run in the political process in a place like Texas, like, how do you deal with those kinds of people? How do you deal with that?
Well, I can tell you it is very difficult to explain to them, even through my own experience as a daughter of immigrants and someone who has had their families, my family, my relatives taken away and deported. It's difficult for them to understand unless they lived it. And so when I've attended a few of these Democratic rallies, I've ran into a lot of people that said, well, the kids, you know, they're going to have to figure out, like, the system has to figure out a way to process these children. And I said, when I pointed out that the children and families are coming here because of the wars that we are waging in other countries, and we need to stop these wars. And I had spoken with O'Rourke about allocating money from the NDAA to veterans instead of allocating money to endless wars, like earmarking money for veterans and services. The women that were there, and they happened to be in their 60s, they were boomers, they said, but war is good. War is good for business. War is good for the economy. Why do we need to stop wars? I said, because wars are what causing these little children to be in cages, which is what you guys are crying about. So if this is something that you want to solve, then let's stop it at the source. Let's stop funding these wars. Let's stop giving blank checks to the Pentagon. Let's stop expanding and the military bases and destabilizing other countries. Let's stop leading these proxy wars in other countries, and let's focus on diplomacy. Let's focus on actual trade policies that benefit not just our country but other countries in a trade that doesn't involve bloodshed.
You know, one thing I also want to ask in a similar vein too, Seema, in terms of sort of political coalitions that need to be built to push progressive causes forward. Now, there was a lot of conversation, as you know very well, at the end of last year about the election, about border counties in Texas. And I really want your perspective on this, because you won a lot of border counties in Texas when you ran in that first Senate primary. I mean, I don't want to make you relitigate or talk too much about what happened in the 2020 election, but what are people talking about? What are people thinking and feeling in these sorts of working class communities? Because it felt to me as if there was almost no understanding of that, and then just a lot of people rushing in to do their one-day article after the election. But it feels like an important factor if we're going to talk about what does it take to build the type of coalition that can push these, you know, the opportunist politicians aside.
Well, when it comes to building coalitions with politicians, that's very difficult to do. I recently found out that my cousin is married to a congressman in Texas. And yeah, that was shocking for me as well during the Thanksgiving holiday. And he's a Democrat, and we haven't really communicated, but he follows me on Twitter. So that's, you know, something, right? But I've tried to reach him on some issues, and he doesn't respond. When we talk about the border issue, the border crisis and immigration policies, it was my relative, who's a congressman, who handled a phone call regarding Francisco Galicia, who was a U.S. citizen detained by Immigrations and Border Patrol, that our group contacted him so that he could do something to intervene to get him out of ICE detention center. And the response from his staff office was, there's really nothing we can do. This is something that typically happens, and they'll be released in a couple of days. Well, this U.S. citizen was held in detention center for weeks. He was coerced to give up his U.S. citizenship. He was tortured. He was humiliated. He wasn't allowed to take a shower, so he had been in detention for weeks. We reached out to several immigration organizations to help, and they did not have the capacity. Some of them didn't even return our calls. So it was up to organizations outside of the state that worked along with myself and another immigration activist to get this U.S. citizen out of detention center. In the meantime, his brother, who was also detained with him, was deported, and he was 16 years old, deported. His parents, undocumented, 18-year-old citizen in detention center. This is something that needs to be addressed. Being a daughter of immigrants who lived on the border, who speaks English and Spanish, like that area, that culture alongside the border, you're walking a fine line. You really are. And to be a Latina or Latino living on the border, you have to have this duality of being enough to be, being American enough, being Mexican enough, being in the culture, but also trying to assimilate in a place that doesn't accept you and rejects you and only comes around during election time. That is something that I've come across a lot along the border area. They don't want to just, be important when it's an election time. They want you to be active and engaged all the time. So it's about connecting. It's about listening to the issues. It is about addressing the issues. It is about people crossing those border checkpoints and not being criminalized at the border. So this is something that happens along the border all the time. And then when it comes to trade and business, there's a lot of emphasis put on, the shopping centers around the border from McAllen all the way to Brownsville or Laredo. There isn't enough investment in infrastructure or education or healthcare facilities. Healthcare facilities are closing down at the border. We have a lot of veterans living down at the border, along the border towns, and there isn't a VA hospital along the border. They have to travel about 3 hours north to San Antonio to get the healthcare that they need as veterans. So a lot of these people that live alongside the border that contribute to society are often ignored. And that is something that I have not done, and I'm still in contact with people at the border and work with organizations that are there. When I go there, I know who to contact, I know who to call. I've worked with people who set up makeshift camps on the Matamoros side of Mexico to help process or house people that have been sent back under Trump's policies and that are now being sent back under Biden's policies. So we have to figure out how to address this in an effective way. And a 100-day moratorium stop on deportations obviously isn't going to work when we have an awful governor of Texas that continuously challenges the Biden administration to stop his executive orders because he wants to keep the contracts. He wants to continue deporting people. At the same time, he is calling for the investigation of children being abused and molested. But he didn't say any of that when Biden was in office. He didn't say any of that when Obama was in office. This is something that has been happening for years under each and every administration. And privatizing the detention centers isn't a solution, because we know that under Southwest Key Detention Centers, which is a nonprofit organization, there was a lot of children that were not cared for. They did not receive the services that they needed. They were getting contracts left and right and not having the capacity to take care of these children. So, I mean, there's many things that can be done, that should be done, that are not being done, and that these things are tangible.
I actually wanted to ask you, I'm glad you mentioned the issue of private detention contracts, because there's this broader issue of, I guess, what you can really term like a border security industrial complex, if you will, where there's all these companies getting these huge contracts, not just for building a wall, but like building a virtual wall for all this like high-tech surveillance gear that we have at the border now. That it's become an issue. They donate to campaigns. They donate to presidential campaigns. In fact, there was a report that the author and journalist Todd Miller released a couple weeks ago, showing that for the first time, the Democratic candidate Biden received more money from these groups, from this industry, than the Republican candidate. And so I'm wondering, at the local level in Texas, is this an issue when it comes to, I assume, Congress people as well, in both parties? Is this an issue of receiving campaign donations from these various companies that are creating the border apparatus and making, huge profits off of it?
From my understanding, even during the last election, 2018 election, 2020 election, I have not seen any Democratic candidates actually accept money from these privatized detention centers. It's typically the Republicans. And now that Biden's in office, maybe things might change. But even
I do mean, just to be clear, I do mean like the broader border apparatus, like the companies that are creating that their technology is what's militarizing the border. So not the private detention facilities, which is also a major problem, of course. I guess my question is, have you run into that, having run in a campaign with contributions coming from those sorts of companies?
So there have been in the past, at least in the 2018 cycle, where even my opponent at the time, O'Rourke, and even, I guess, the 2020 election, Veronica Escobar, did accept money from military contractors who benefit from the either border wall construction or border detention centers or just the destabilization of other countries. So these contractors and the immigration crisis and detention centers go hand in hand. So we have seen an influx of Democrats get money that is tied to the military-industrial complex that benefits from the immigration crisis, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, it does, and I think that's a huge problem in terms of incentivizing this ongoing. I mean, it's a multifaceted issue, but if you've got people getting campaign contributions from Elbit Systems, I don't know if Elbit Systems is handing out campaign contributions, but they have huge contracts at the U.S. border. Then I think that would definitely change the perspective of people in office in terms of how far they're willing to go, obviously. And I don't hear the conversation from any major Democrats I can think of. The conversation never goes beyond, like, it's cruel at the border. It never goes to, okay, but like, why is it cruel at the border? Of course, yeah, the imperialism is a problem, but also there's this militarized border apparatus that apprehends people and puts them in detention and separates them. And that apparatus, and there's an apparatus that literally surveils people as they're crossing the border and pushes them into the most hazardous and deadly terrain to make it more difficult for them to get to the U.S. So they end up having to go through the desert and they die of thirst. And this is built into the strategy. And I never see Democrats. I don't even know if they know, but I never see them talk about that either. Of course, Republicans don't either. I know I'm rambling now, but it's just like, it's a difficult crisis. I also got my second dose of vaccine today. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the show, I am not responsible for my behavior this evening because I'm starting to feel it.
Well, I am so glad you're rambling and I'm not.
But it's infuriating. I guess it's just like, I'm sure we all feel the same way. It is so infuriating because we all knew when Trump was doing it, all of these tears were crocodile tears from the people who are saying nothing now. And it's disgusting because the same suffering is taking place. These are people's lives. These are people's children. These are people's mothers and fathers. And they've already, had their livelihoods destroyed. Like, nobody wants to leave their home. My parents didn't want to leave their home. They leave because it's no longer a good place to live because of the conditions being created. And none of this is ever talked about. So I'm so happy that you're talking about it and that you're not afraid to, because I know that there's not a lot to be gained politically from speaking about these things the way that you do.
Well, the way I like to think about this is that silence is inherently violence. And so when we're silent about these issues and we're not talking about them, then we are perpetuating the violence. And when we decide to cover for the violence and saying everything is okay, any bad faith actors in the critique is considered not helpful, let's just fall in line and be quiet, like that in itself is silencing and censoring the people who are actually being impacted or affected. I do not like the weaponization of our undocumented brothers and sisters, or my relatives, as I like to say. That I think is a disingenuous argument. It's a dishonest argument because it is those that are impacted that have a lot to say and have a lot of criticism for this administration, as with previous administrations, because we recognize that this didn't just happen under Trump. This happened under Bush, under Clinton, under Obama, under Trump, and perpetuated again by Biden. And Biden was a key person in perpetuating these wars because he was in office for 47 years before he took a break and then ran for president. He is the architect of mass incarceration that was built on the war on drugs in the 1970s and 1980s. So it's this constant criminalization of Black and brown people and the incarceration of our bodies. And then the destabilization in different countries that has perpetuated the mass incarceration crisis that, a certain individual is talking about in Congress. But she doesn't actually address how the militarization comes back home, where these military weapons are given over to our policing officers in this country. And we have militarized cities, militarized borders, militarized countries, militarized bases, and all of this is perpetuated by the military empire called the United States. So if we want to stop this violence, this policy violence, we have to address these things with a different way of writing policy and actually centering the most impacted people that have the most to say, that have the most criticism, so that this administration can learn how to move forward instead of continuously putting people in a place where other individuals profit or exploit us.
I think that's so important. I mean, just the idea that people, I mean, they spend the whole year, $1 billion, vote, 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 vote. And then you get in there and it's like, well, then don't criticize me. I mean, the fact that you say you want someone's support, you often gain that support. And then if there is feeling that you have not done enough, then all of a sudden it's the people's fault for criticizing you. I mean, if anything, Seema, I think, quite frankly, we're often too soft on politicians. I mean, myself included sometimes, because you don't want to feel like you're just ragging on one person or you're not looking at the broader systemic piece. But the scale of the problems we're facing, I often think, like, who are these people to say don't criticize?
Well, I always look at politicians that have experienced the oppression, have experienced the violence, have been the refugees. Although they are not perfect, they have the stance that I would have taken in Congress, or that any normal person that sees human suffering would take in Congress, which is recognizing that the United States is an empire, is causing these destabilizations. We have Representative Ilhan Omar who talks about it. She came out here down to the border and visited a few concentration camps. Even when the news, the journalists or the news organizations weren't allowed to go into these concentration camps. I thought this was supposed to be a time where it's different under Biden. But why block the media from coming in? Why block the conversation? Because even the media is complicit in the silence, in the violence, and we need more people like Ilhan Omar. We need more people like Jamal Bowen, who is actually talking about the different processes taking place in Congress to stop this policy violence, that are letting us understand the processes rather than talking about it in, different social media videos or venues.
I think
they're actually using the pulpit to advance a conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, using their
the
platform
to advance a conversation. I'm sorry.
Absolutely. No, you're right. Using their I was just saying what you were saying, using their platform, their pulpit to advance the conversation. Absolutely. And also, I do appreciate that Ilhan Omar may, at least from what I've seen, be one of the only Congress people who does make that connection between empire. Maybe not as amazing as you just did, but she does speak about it, between empire and people having to leave. And that I do appreciate that. And I guess, you're talking about AOC when you mentioned the congressperson, on social media. And it is a shame because not only, and I hate to go back to always making it about AOC, that's not why I'm saying this, but just to note that it was really, that's why it was so frustrating to see her go to bat for the Biden administration, in saying, like, this is different. What's the point in saying it's different? It is a little bit different. Yeah, there was a few worse things happening under Trump. Yes, but it's still horrible what's happening. What's the point in finger wagging at people who are still really, really upset about the horrors that continue to take place? And it seems not to be a constructive way to go about doing this, unless you're trying to cover for the party that's in charge. And that was a really unfortunate display. That's as diplomatic as I can get.
No, and I understand. It's just, I take it very personal because this issue on immigration hits me very personally. It hits me on a different level. So although I'm a blue check on Twitter, I am poor. I am poor and I'm impacted and I'm concerned for my relatives who are in danger or who are still going through the citizenship process. I still remember the years that it took for my grandmother to even, just feel comfortable in her home without fearing that someone's going to come and take her kids away or my cousins away or someone else. So it hits me really personally, and it's discouraging to see someone with such a huge following tell people to pipe down, quiet down, everything's going to be fine, while so many people are still suffering without bringing attention. And this is the thing is her sticking her foot in this pile of crap in the way that she did is almost a silver lining, because we get to talk about the actual conversation and get to expose it and unpack it and unravel it for people who do not understand that this administration is complicit in the decades of violence and has the opportunity to undo some of the damage that it did in a very significant way. And if anything, we need people with a bully pulpit that is as big as hers with 10 million followers and so on and so forth to continue to inspire people to take action, to be involved in the political process instead of telling them everything's going to be fine because Democrats are in control. That's not true. Right now, it's like trying to erase the decades of harm the Democratic Party did using one of the most popular figures that has been uplifted by this movement that we thought she was going to be on our side. And right now, she's literally throwing us under the bus and weaponizing the most vulnerable to do so. That's the part that hurts, and that's the part that's disingenuous. And I hope that she rethinks her position and comes back in a way that she can redeem herself and do what's right for the most vulnerable people in this country, which are the undocumented people, not just the brown people, black people, Asian people. It's, Muslim people, people who have been destabilized in their countries that are coming here seeking refuge.
Seema, one thing that I'm curious about is considering all of this. What do you say to people who are maybe feeling a little discouraged, feeling, well, okay, I thought we did so much and now it doesn't seem like a lot of things are changing. Should I just give up?
Absolutely not. In fact, the way I feel about the two-party system, that's the entire purpose of it, is it wants to disenfranchise us. It wants to continue to be in power. We know that this is a good cop, bad cop, depending on the policy or depending on the scenario, that this two-party system is able to stay in place because so many of us feel disenfranchised, feel like there is nothing that we can do and that it's a hopeless situation, when in fact, there is so much that we can do to be involved. Get involved in local organizing, help people who, organizations that are helping the drive for unionization, supporting workers on strike, supporting the undocumented by donating food, supplies, doing mutual aid with immigration groups, doing mutual aid with one another, figuring out a way to actually collaborate with one another. One of the things that I truly believe is that we don't need one leader. We actually need a coalition of people working together, because if there is one leader, that leader will be co-opted, taken down, or manipulated or used or weaponized to get us to stop fighting against the very system that is continuing to oppress us. And that was one of the things that I put out today, is that I don't agree that we need one leader. When we ourselves know what's going on in our community, we can figure out how to organize, work together, do it through mutual aid. And it's important to know that the power lies within us, and it is up to us to think for ourselves and to speak up when there is an injustice happening. And do not be afraid to say the uncomfortable things, because our politicians are not made to be comfortable. They're supposed to be uncomfortable and do the job that they were elected to do, which is represent us and represent our needs and protect the most vulnerable.
Mm-hmm. Well, Seema, I really appreciate you giving us your time here tonight, and thank you for all that you've done, standing up, speaking out, raising a lot of these issues, and inspiring a lot of people. It was really an honor to have you here with us on the Freedom Side tonight.
Thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
Of course, absolutely. And that is going to draw us here to a close on the Freedom Side this evening. Rania, I have to say it was an honor to be here alongside you for the second week in a row.
It was an honor, and I do have to apologize for my unpolished verbiage. I feel like I really do feel like I know I'm not joking. I'm not telling people get vaccinated. Everybody get vaccinated.
Absolutely.
But I think within about 6 or 12 hours, I like how the whole studio burst out laughing.
Yeah.
When I was like, it's the vaccine.
It's true.
But between 12 and 24 hours, some people experience side effects, and I feel them coming on. So I do apologize for that. I'll be sharper next week. But this was very pleasant.
I thought you were very sharp. I learned
a lot from our guests. I did too. That was a fantastic panel.
It was.
And I want to have them all back on at some point in the future.
I would love that. And thank you again to Phil Agnew, Sierra Taylor, and Seema Hernandez for joining us. If you want to see more things like this, and if you want to keep seeing Rania and I, And next week, I'm getting my vaccine second dose.
It'll
so
be
you'll
your
be
turn.
sharp, I'll be bad. But nevertheless,
Yeah.
if you want to see more of us, please go to patreon.com/breakthrough news. That's patreon.com/breakthrough news. Become a patron. I think you better do it by next week, because I think we're going to be doing a very exciting patrons-only hangout involving Rania, myself, and maybe some other exciting names. So look for that. Patreon.com.
You don't want to miss it, you guys.
You don't want to
miss it.
We will be
You don't wanna miss
vaxxed up. It will be very. we may even be in the same place. Believe it or not.
It's possible. It's possible. Big surprises.
Absolutely. But we do public health here, so it'll be very safe either way. Nevertheless, patreon.com/breakthrough news. We appreciate all your support. We appreciate everyone who's always watching us, sharing all of our content here on Breakthrough News. We will be back with you again next Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, as we always are, here on the Freedom Side.